Components. While CSS is referring to the styling of HTML elements, components refer to more elaborate constructs typically used in websites, like navigation bars, breadcrumbs, pagination, and so forth. Those are typically built using a set of HTML elements, like an ordered list or nested divs, etc. Like CSS, what's most important with regards to Bootstrap is determining the class name that refers to these components. The Bootstrap documentation is the reference you should go to in order to understand how these can be set up. While one could use CSS components and JavaScript from sources external to Bootstrap, the Bootstrap ones can be dropped into your code with the guarantee that they will work properly on a responsive website, and that's their benefit. So let's take a look at these components, such as the glyph icons, as you can see, the nav bars. This is a navbar example, for example, with the brand on the left, a set of 3 navigation items, one of which is a drop-down, a search area, a submit button, another link, and another drop-down, and so forth. Now, as an example, let's consider the breadcrumbs component, which I can find right here. And we have a home, library, and data, as you can see in this third row. According to the documentation, these are implemented as an ordered list, OL, right? OL is ordered list, with a class name of breadcrumb. Note the implementation. The OL opens and closes, we use the class name of breadcrumb, and then the list items show the different breadcrumb items. Also note the use of the active class name to indicate the current page the breadcrumb refers to. The documentation details the use of other breadcrumbs as well, such as pagination, for example. As you can see, the pagination, the progress bars right here. And under progress bars, we can look at the striped example, for example, the animated example. We can toggle animation and then we see, the progress bar animating, you name it. So all of these components are really powerful, and I encourage you to go over them all and see what they do and how you can potentially implement them on your website. JavaScript. We can access all Bootstrap plugins by including bootstrap.minified.js or bootstrap.js, or we can alternatively just include the plugins we choose. For our purposes, including bootstrap.minified.js is sufficient, and it will give us access to all the plugins. Also, let's not forget to also include a reference to the latest jQuery library. We may access the plugins through either data attributes, which is preferred, as we don't have to write a single line of JavaScript if we don't want to, or JavaScript, which they call the programmatic API. While the latter is what we've typically used when referring to JavaScript plugins, Bootstrap's support of data attributes makes it cleaner and easier to access the plugin from within our HTML code. Let's take a look at Bootstrap's plugins and then look closely at an example. The drop-down is one of the plugins, and as you can see, when I click on the word drop-down, I get a drop-down menu. If I go on popover, I scroll down, I click on the live demo, click to toggle popover, and this is the popover effect. Another plugin is the carousel, which is basically the cycle plugin, except that this is responsive. The cycle plugin we used with the French Alps website is not responsive, so it won't scale up and down, as opposed to the carousel here. it will change sizes with the size of the window. So that's quite powerful. Let's look at the collapse plugin, which is right here. Specifically the button with data target implementation. So this one. So when we press on the button, as you can see, we toggle the visibility of the div whose ID is collapse example right here. This is the div and its ID is collapse example, and this is the very div itself. Note that the class of the div is collapse and the data toggle attribute of the button is also collapse, and the data target attribute is collapse example, which is the ID of the div in question. So in other words, when we click on this button, it's going to target the div whose ID is collapse example and have it appear or disappear. The remaining plugins can also be accessed by once again referring to the documentation. Let's revisit the portfolio example we implemented without Bootstrap to achieve a responsive website. To implement with Bootstrap, let's go to the About and Portfolio HTML pages and add the viewport meta tagline and a line that points to bootstrap.css.minified file on Content Delivery Network. So I'm going to open the about.html page. What I would recommend you do is copy, if you have a folder called responsive web design, copy it and call it Bootstrap responsive or something in that effect to make changes without altering the files in the original folder. Okay, so again I'm going to go to about.html, and I've already done this, so let me show you what I did. Let me increase the font size so we see better. I added the meta viewport to activate zooming, and I added the bootstrap.minified.css, so I'm accessing that file online, and that's all I did. In this case, we won't be using any JavaScript plugins, but if we did, we could include them along with the jQuery library at the end of the file. In the style.css file, I removed all media query references as those are now done in Bootstrap. So include / and asterisk at the beginning and asterisk / at the end of the @media queries. Going back to the about.html page, I added a parent div with a container fluid class to the 4 skill sections. And I also added a single parent div with a row class name, as you can see right here. To each section with class name skills, I added 2 more class names, the call xs12 and the call md3. What this does is it stacks the skills sections for extra small and small devices and lays them out horizontally for medium and large devices. That's because the Bootstrap grid system is made up of 12 columns. So each section will occupy 12 columns, which means from the left side to the right side of the screen for narrow devices, while each section will occupy only 3 columns for wide screens, because 3 times 4 is 12, and therefore we can fit in 4 columns next to one another from left to right on the wide screens. With regards to the portfolio.html page, again, if I increase the font size so we see better, the head section is the same thing as we discussed in the about section. With regards to what's in the body element, again, I added a parent div with a container fluid, as you can see right here. right before the opening of ULID portfolio. Obviously, I need my rows, and I have two rows, so I added div class row before the first UL and div class row before the second UL. It used to be one UL with 8 LIs, but I divided them into two ULs with 4 LIs each because I have two rows and I placed each UL within a div class row. I also added the call XS6 and the call MD3 class names to each LI in addition to the class name projects. And what this does is it lays each of the four images horizontally for medium and large devices and stacks the images two on each row for extra small and small devices. So let's go ahead and see if this indeed is the case. If I open portfolio.html in the browser, so this is the portfolio page. As you can see, we have the 4 columns on one row. Obviously, the padding and the margin is off currently, but that we can fix in our style.css. That's not a problem. So this is the layout for white screens, and when we scale the window down, you're going to see two images with project names per row. Similarly, if we go to the About page, on narrow screens you will have all sections stacked, as opposed to wide screens where we have 4 columns next to one another. And obviously, again, we can fix the paddings and margins. That's not an issue.